You have had to deal with a serious situation in terms of the school system here in Washington, D.C. When you came in, the numbers were astounding. 12% of 8th graders reading a proficient level. You also had, in terms of math scores, 8% of the students reaching that particular level. You come in, you make all of these kind of changes, you tick tons of folks off. Here you have a president talking about change. You try to make change happen, and folks get angry. How do you believe we can make significant changes if folks are so skittish about the status quo and don't necessarily like the kind of change you try to bring about?
I think that is the question that we face right now in the country, and in particular in the education reform circles. There are actual fundamental differences between a group of people that are responsible for educating children in this country. And some people think it should be done in one way, and some people think it should be done in the other. And we actually have to get to the meat of those issues. And so the fact that people are so averse to having tough discussions, I think there is no organized, mobilization effort of just normal people who send their kids to public schools, who don't like the outcomes. There's no way for them to have their voice heard.
All right, here's what Geoffrey Canada, the Harlem Children's Zone, the founder, had to say about you. We talked to him after the documentary, Waiting for Superman. We're going to get into that in a second. But here's what Canada had to say. I want to deal with radical change. We're in Washington, D.C. Michelle Rhee, Chancellor of the school system. They had their election. Mayor Adrian Fenty, her biggest supporter, was voted out of office. Education was a driving component of that. Are you afraid, though, that as a result of this election, it shows the problem that we have when you combine education and politics and radical change?
Well, here's what I'm worried about. I wish there were 30 cases of educators like Michelle doing the tough things. There are very, very few. What we have to do is really start a revolution around this issue of education in this country. This is a civil rights issue. We've got to demand this for our kids. We shouldn't have just one Michelle Rhee. We should have 100 of these folks in the toughest places in the country. But it also shows me this. We've got to educate the poorest families, the ones who need this the most, about what's causing their children to not be able to do well in school. And then they'll start embracing folks like Michelle instead of being allowed to think, well, she's the problem because she closed my school when that school hasn't educated 10% of the kids for 50 years. We've got to get our parents to demand that these schools deliver for their children. And we have, as a group, we have lots of poor families who have just accepted, my kids aren't going to do well, the school's not good, but I don't want anybody messing with it because that's the only thing I have left. We've got to give these folks a real opportunity. And by the way, once they see it, once parents actually see that there's an option, you begin to see poor people really rally. You look at what's going on in Harlem, around the charter schools. We've got 10,000 families on a waiting list trying to get into those schools. But why? Because they have a choice. And places where there's no choice, families say, look, I know it's lousy, just give me the school, don't bother my school.
You're shaking your head, absolutely agreeing.
Well, you don't get any better than Geoffrey Canada, but he's absolutely right. I mean, part of what we need in this country is a revolution, and for people to understand that when we're doing things like closing schools or firing teachers, some of the tough stuff, which, that he was talking about, we have to get people to understand why we're doing those things. I went over to Ward 8 one day when we were thinking about closing a school there, and I went and talked to a group of gentlemen who were across the street from the school. And they said to me, don't close the school, don't close the school, it's a great school, we love the school, it's an anchor of the community. And I was thinking to myself, this is not a great school. Less than 20% of the children at this school are on grade level.
80% failing.
80% failing, which means that we are doing a disservice to the children every single day by keeping this school open.
But the building, people were saying, keep the building.
Because one of them said, do you really think that what we need in this neighborhood is another boarded up building? And I get that. I mean, that's a reality that we need to understand. But at the same time, we can't keep schools open that continue to fail children year in and year out.
Before I get to the documentary, I need to pick up on what Geoffrey said. The reality is when you look at education in this country, in most places, you have school boards, they're elected.
Yes.
Even when you have a mayor, in the case of Washington, D.C., Chicago, other schools, who takes over a city, that person takes over a school district, that person is elected.
Right.
And so the reality is you have political people who are put in office by voters who want to see things change, who hire educators, and what happens is they always say, look, I'm trying to stay elected.
Right.
And so do you believe that we are likely to continue to see this? Because when education and politics comes together and budgets, you can't fire people. Oh my God, I read a piece of some column, she fired all these teachers, most of them were black. And I'm sitting there going, okay, but were they good teachers? Who cares if they were black? Isn't that the fundamental issue? Politics is at the forefront of this issue.
It absolutely is. I mean, that's my biggest takeaway from the last 3.5 years and everything that happened with the election. Because I, maybe somewhat naively, came into this thinking, if we just improve outcomes for kids, even though we have to make a lot of the tough decisions, people will see that it works, and then we'll be okay. And over the last 3.5 years, the results that we've seen are unparalleled any time in the history of Washington, D.C. But at the end of the day, it's politics that came into play. And, you know, Adrian Fenty, when we started, said, I'm willing to put my entire political career on the line to let you do the things that you need to do to make the schools better. And unfortunately, that was his political career. I think the question is this. I mean, the teachers' unions put $1 million into the campaign here in Washington, D.C., because they didn't want Fenty to be reelected. So what that does, to your point, is it complicates the next mayor's job, right? So he got $1 million from the teachers union. The teachers union is going to feel like, okay, this guy is beholden to us now. He's got to do, and education reform can actually continue. It absolutely can. He just has to be able to be courageous and say no to some of the people who helped get him elected.